In this lesson, we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations. And with these ones, we're going to learn the easiest method to solving quadratics, where we use factoring in order to find our solutions. So what is this word solution? What am I talking about? When we're dealing with quadratics, solutions are always found on the x-axis. So right here's my x-axis. And I see that this quadratic is going to cross at this point, which would be -5, and this point would be -3. And so our solutions are always found on the x-axis. The equation of my x-axis is y equals 0. And so to find solutions of quadratics, we need to set the equation equal to 0, and then we can be able to solve that. So I'm going to go over 3 examples, and for this first example, I'm going to go over the steps. So we've got y equals x squared minus 5x minus 14. So we want to find the solutions, or we want to find the x-intercepts to this equation. So our first step, just like we talked about, we need to set the equation equal to 0. And so sometimes we may have things on one side of the equation that we don't have on the other. Here, we're just going to set that y equal to 0. So we've got 0 equals x squared minus 5x minus 14. And now our next step is to factor. And so I've gone over 2 methods on how to factor. We've gone over the x method and we've gone over the box method. I'm going to use the x method for this one, but I'll use the box method here in a little bit. So I'm going to set up my x. And so my first number, which in this case is 1, times my last number, which in this case is -14, would get me -14 on top and -5 on the bottom. And so now I'm thinking what 2 numbers multiply to the top, -14, and add to the bottom. Well, we can say 7 and 2 would be 14. And if I make this 7 negative, 2 minus 7 would get me -5. So these are my 2 key numbers. And I'm going to divide both of these by my first number, which is 1. So my 2 factors are x minus 7 and x plus 2. And remember, all that is equal to 0. Okay, so this is just another way of representing this. So I'm going to set that equation equal to 0. And so now we're multiplying these 2 factors, and we're multiplying to get 0. So that means at least one of these, if we're multiplying to get 0, at least one of these need to be equal to 0. Okay, and we also want to find where we're crossing the x-axis. And so what I'm going to do next, I'm going to take each of these factors and I'm going to set them equal to 0, and I'm going to solve them. So that means I've got x minus 7 equals 0, and x plus 2 is going to be equal to 0. Okay, and then just to solve, pretty easy here, just one step. I'm going to add 7. Or I can just say move this over, and when I move something over, it's going to become negative. So here they really just switch signs. So I've got x is equal to 7 and x is equal to -2. And since I'm ending up with 2 answers here, we usually want to write that as a set, which is just x equals the squiggly bracket. And I'm going to say -2, 7 are my solutions to this quadratic equation. So that one is pretty straightforward. We're just going to factor and then take those two factors that we find, and we're going to set those equal to 0 and solve. Let's try another one. We've got 0 equals x squared minus 81. So our first step, set it equal to 0. Here I already have that. I've got 0 equals the rest of my quadratic, so I'm good there. And I'm going to move to step 2, which is to factor. Okay, here looks a little different. I don't have a b term. I don't have anything x. So I'm going to rewrite this as x squared plus 0x's minus 81. And so now if I use the x method again, I've got -81 on top, 0 on bottom. And I can say 9 minus 9. If I multiply those two, I'm going to get -81, and 9 minus 9 equals 0. And divide both sides by 1. So this is going to give me x plus 9 times x minus 9, and that equals 0. Now, let's move into our third step. I'm going to set each of these terms equal to 0. And then to solve, I just need to move both these 9's over. The one on the left is going to become negative, and this one's going to become positive. So I've got x equals -9 and x equals positive 9. And so to write them as a set, I'm going to say x equals negative 9, positive 9. Or we could also write it with this, notation where we say plus or minus 9. That plus or minus sign is going to be important in future lessons, so just make sure you are okay with seeing that. We've got one more example. This one's maybe a little more complicated, but still following the same steps will get us to where we need to be. My first step is always to make sure the equation is equal to 0. Now I've got this 52 hanging out on the right. I need that to be 0, so I'm going to subtract 52 on both sides so that I can get rid of that. So I get 2x squared minus 22x minus 52 is now equal to 0. Now my second step is to factor, and let's remember that the first step of factoring is always to factor out a GCF. So here all of these terms can be divided by 2. When I do that, 2x squared divided by 2 will just leave me with x squared. Then I get negative 11x and negative 26, like this. And so I've been using the x method, so I'll use the box method for this one. Okay, to set up my box, my first term goes in my first box, so that's x squared, and then negative 26 in my last box. So now I need to find my two key numbers, and the two key numbers still need to multiply to my first times my last, which in this case is 1 times negative 26, get us negative 26. And those same two numbers need to add to my b, which is negative 11. So what two numbers do this? Well, I've got 2 and 13 will get me to multiply those to get 26. But if I want these two to add to negative 11, I'm going to make my 13 negative. So I've got 2 minus 13 to get negative 11. So now let's write this in. I've got plus 2x and minus 13x. And so now we find the GCF horizontally. So here I can factor out an x. That will leave me with an x plus 2. And here I can factor out a 13, but a negative 13. So I'll factor out negative 13 because that leaves me with a positive x and a positive 2. So my two factors are x plus 2 and x minus 13. But also remember that we had this GCF at the very beginning that I need to include in there as well. Now my third step is to get all of my factors equal to 0. I have 3 factors this time. Okay, I've got these two, but I've also got my GCF that I took out at the very beginning. So setting all of these equal to 0 would look something like this. Okay. And now this first thing I have, 2 equals 0, we know that's not true, so that part is not going to play into my solution set here. But these other two, I just need to subtract 2 and add 13. So I get x is equal to negative 2 and x is equal to positive 13. So my solutions are negative 2 and 13. This has been our lesson over solving quadratic equations with factoring. We can use factoring to find the solutions to our quadratic functions just by plugging those in, solving for, setting them equal to 0 and solving for x. And that'll tell us our solution. So this is usually the easiest way to solve quadratics, but we are going to look at some examples of quadratic equations that are not factorable. So stay tuned for that one, but in the meantime, I hope you had as much fun as I did with this lesson, and I'll see you in the next video.